Thank you very much. I won't waste a whole lot of time on the preliminaries, but I think it's fairly well common knowledge in our field at this point that the majority of American adults fail to meet the dietary guidelines and recommendations given to them, but this problem is concerningly exacerbated on the lower ends of the income distribution. And so that's led to a lot of speculation and arguments over the last few decades as to why that is the case. Well, the conventional wisdom that's persisted for quite a while now is that healthy food is just too expensive. And if you have low income, you can't afford expensive things. Therefore, that's the problem. The people really pushing this theory since the 90s, and maybe even a little bit before, were nutritionists playing the economist. And so they were kind of the only voice in the game on that. A handful of real economic studies popped up in the last decade to decade and a half, kind of pushing back on that and saying, well, that's not totally correct. One of the major shortcomings of these nutrition studies is they measured the cost of food as some kind of energy cost, dollars per 100 calories or something like that, which doesn't make a lot of sense economically. We measure quantity, dollars per quantity, or cost per quantity when we're talking about cost of things. And I would like to point out that in a world of excess calories, energy density has a negative shadow value. So taking a step back, does cost play much of a role in this problem in the first bullet point? And what does that role look like? How extensive is it? Well, we need to start from a very simple framework, make a stylized economic model, make some simplifying assumptions so that this problem is actually tractable in the first place. And imagine that there's two consumers, and they're identical in all regards except for income. They are exactly the same except that one is rich, one is poor. And in this initial world, neither is aware to any meaningful degree of nutritional differences between foods. So they consume a utility maximizing diet. To do that, they maximize palatability to optimize their utility subject to their respective food budgets. Okay. Well, now suppose they are made aware of which dietary choices actually constitute healthy eating. So those differences between foods that they were ignorant of at first, now they know. All right, well, they have a choice. These consumers are faced with imposing an additional constraint on their utility to meet minimum dietary quality. It's a nutrition constraint, right? They could get lucky and the original set of foods just happens to meet that minimum nutritional level. But in the event, the more likely event that the original set of foods does not satisfy that nutrition constraint, we've got a problem. Either tastiness of their diet needs to be sacrificed in order to accommodate nutrition because the original set of foods didn't measure. But they can also preserve the original level of taste by expanding the portion of income allocated to food. Or, alternatively, they could just forego imposing this new constraint, ignore it. They're aware of it, but they don't have to do it. The pressure, the temptation to pick that alternative and forego imposing that additional constraint on their utility is stronger for the consumer with less income, because at the end, expanding the food budget is less of an obstacle to the consumer with more income. So let's actually test this. This is a nice little theory. Does it hold up in the real world? We take the NHANES data, we subset it to be all adults 18 years and older with 2 completed days of dietary reporting. That's the maximum number of days. We covered 2007 to 2010. The first variable, kind of obvious, diet quality. So nutritionists have these tools called nutrient profiling models where you can assign a score to an individual food item. And the one that I think makes the most sense was developed about a decade ago by Arsenault et al. It's a data-driven method that takes USDA dietary guidelines and says, okay, given what people ate and how well they adhered to the guidelines, what did their nutrient levels look like? And then project that onto foods. So good nutrients like fiber and vitamin K have positive weights that add to nutrition. Sodium, added sugar, saturated fat have negative weights. They detract from nutrition, okay? So that's a pretty straightforward measure. For diets, we aggregate up over all the foods eaten, weighted by share of total grams eaten. Diet costs, pretty straightforward. Food price database from the CNPP. You can match that to NHANES using the USDA food code system. The third variable, the most fun, how in the world do you measure tastiness? There is a new-ish paper, came out in Food Policy about a year ago, that does kind of what the nutritionists did, except instead of looking at adherence to dietary guidelines, you look at palatability. And so we have a data-driven algorithm that spits out an equation with parameters basically flipped from the healthiness side of things. So sodium, added sugar, saturated fat, they have positive weights because they add to tastiness. Fiber and vitamin K, which you would find in whole grains and vegetables, have negative weights because to the average person, they detract from tastiness. And then last, we have dietary variety. In the theory, we just talked about number of foods in this set, number of foods in that set. So we use Jekanowski and Binkley's food count concentration measure. How many foods did you eat to get to 75% of your total intake? So let's build a model. We've got our data, we've got our variables. Let's see how this holds up. Cost is the obvious dependent variable, dollars per 100 grams, dollars per quantity. We have a year fixed effect from 2007 to 2010, just in case there were any macro shocks. I mean, someone said there was like a recession or something. I don't know. I don't read the news. We have a linear term for healthiness, linear term for tastiness. We have an interaction of healthiness and tastiness because we have very good reason to believe, according to the nutrition and the consumer economic literature, that there is a direct tension. And you can actually visualize that tension between healthiness and tastiness in the food policy paper. And then we have a measure of variety, number of foods eaten to get to 75% of your total intake. We think beta 3 and beta 4 should be positive. The reasoning behind this is pretty straightforward because in the theory, we said that if we need to expand the food set, so we'd increase variety by 1, that's not free. You have to pay for it. So that should be positive. Healthiness, tastiness, if that is positive, meaningfully positive, then we would say, okay, that's consistent with this idea of there being a trade-off between tastiness and healthiness. And so an increased cost. Surprise, surprise, they're both positive and significant. These are standardized beta coefficients, so it's a standard deviation change to a standard deviation change. And then take the first derivative with healthiness with respect to tastiness. For most of the way until very high tastiness, the effect is not positive and significant. So healthy food by itself doesn't necessarily cost more. Healthy eating does not necessitate costly eating unless it is made to taste really good, i.e. you expand the food set. So expanding that food set is less of an obstacle for the high-income consumer, and therefore the temptation to forego imposing the nutrition constraint is stronger for the consumer with less income. Yes.
Yeah, so I'll start. So starting with this is like literature or like you mentioned earlier, but can you maybe elaborate on like so when we often talk about the trade-off between healthy food and cost, there's also the equation of like argument for like it make it more expensive for those folks. It's not that they are not wanting to consume this healthy product, but the healthier option just becomes more expensive because they don't have maybe like a larger grocery stores in town that can carry. Can you maybe share some thoughts on that and how that relates to your research?
Sure, sure. Very briefly, because I don't want to eat into the next presenter's time. I have found the access literature to be very mixed in its conclusions. And the data that we have here from NHANES, this is actually food intake data. So it's what they ate. It doesn't have anything to do with where they got it, although there is a variable in there about was this prepared at home? Was this obtained at a table service restaurant? Was it at a fast food restaurant? Where did the food come from? But the nice thing is that the CNPP food price database converts all of that to food at home prices. So if you did go out to eat and got meatloaf from a restaurant, you would pay the restaurant price, but had you prepared the same meatloaf at home, what would the groceries have cost you, the ingredients, that sort of thing. So, yeah, sure thing. One more. Oh, very good. Thank you all.
I was just trying to share the screen. Oh, there. Thanks. Sorry. Okay, welcome. I'm presenting joint work with professor from Washington State University, the impacts of COVID-19 on employment in the essential food and agriculture sector. So I want to begin with a figure that gives you an overview of 2020 employment within essential sectors. How I designate essential sectors I'll discuss in a moment, but right now I want you to take note that the upper or red line provides other essential sectors, and these are employment rates in the basic CPS current population survey monthly for essential sectors. So you'll note that the other essential sectors maintain a fairly consistent level of employment percentage through January and February. In March, we start to see a little drop, and then in April, we see a big drop, starting to recover slightly in May. The food and agriculture sector, also deemed essential, parallels this at a lower level in January and February, again dropping in March with a greater drop in April, recovery in May. You might remember there was some sort of pandemic that happened in here. So we're going to discuss how and what happened. Specifically, our objective is what individual characteristics contribute to inequities in employment patterns for the food and agriculture sector. So by inequities in individual characteristics, I mean individuals of certain race, ethnicity groups, genders, and of immigrant status. So we collect data from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Essential Infrastructure Designations. These are how we determine that food and agriculture is one of 16 critical infrastructures in the United States. We use crosswalks as developed by the CDC to connect this to the current population survey basic monthly from January 2020 to May 2020. This data set, if you are unfamiliar, has a 484 survey process. So 4 months in a row, they interview respondents, they take an 8-month break, and they revisit those same respondents 4 months later. Therefore, we're limited in the duration we can use this survey to have a pre and during pandemic comparison. We began in January 2020 to observe those respondents from January 2020 to April 2020 or February 2020 to May 2020. One caveat we include is that individuals must be employed pre-pandemic. We don't want to observe individuals that were unemployed because we would like to understand how the duration of the pandemic influenced which individuals became unemployed. And finally, we include the Kaiser Family Foundation database on COVID-19 restrictions and mandates, which provides an overview of when states placed stay-at-home orders or mask mandates and similar. Some summary statistics for the data set are above, again noting that the initial sample includes individuals that are employed pre-pandemic. So these unemployed outcomes here are not necessarily reflective of the employment rates that we observed during the months of the pandemic. But I do want to highlight that the food and agriculture sector had a higher CPS final basic weighted mean unemployment of unemployed outcomes than the other essential sectors. The other notable difference is that individuals employed in the food and agriculture sector were on average of younger age than in other essential sectors. There are more individuals of Hispanic ethnicity and of immigrant status. So the method with which we go about understanding this is a fixed effects method. YIT is an outcome variable that we use as 1 if a respondent is unemployed and 0 otherwise, to capture individuals that move from employed to unemployed as the pandemic persists. Gamma P are pandemic month fixed effects, and we go about creating this such that January and February are given a value of 0 as they are before the pandemic. March has a value of 1, April 2, and May 3. So we can observe how these unemployment outcomes are changing as the pandemic endures in its initial stages. Sector is an indicator variable for these essential sectors, as I mentioned, with focus on food and agriculture. So in the sample that considers essential sectors, we denote food and agriculture employees with a value of 1 and others with a value of 0. Then we have a coefficient beta for female indicator variable. So if a respondent is female, we have several bins for race, ethnicity, indicator variables, white, non-Hispanic, black, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, and other race ethnicities. And finally, a coefficient for immigration or immigrant status. So if a respondent reported that they are an immigrant or a non-immigrant. Then we also acknowledge that stay-at-home orders may have an impact on individuals becoming unemployed, and that is captured by tau and Z. At the individual level for individual I, state S, and time T. And then we move to a vector of individual level household and individual characteristics such as marital status, income bracket, and so forth. We include an individual fixed effect, a state fixed effect, and an error term. When we proceed with estimation, standard errors are clustered at the state level. So results, when we consider the entire sample of individuals employed pre-pandemic, we observe that individuals who are employed in the essential sector experienced lower likelihoods of unemployment in April and May by 2.5 percentage points and 2 percentage points respectively. That should hopefully be logical. Those essential sectors were deemed more important than some others in the functioning of our economy despite the face of a global pandemic. And then if we move to essential sectors and focus within our indicator variable for sector on food and agriculture, we observe higher rates of unemployment compared to other essential sector counterparts in April and May of 6 percentage points in April and 2.4 in May. And if we look within the food and agriculture sector, we actually find that individuals employed in food manufacturing were less likely to become unemployed than other members of food and agriculture. We're at 7.3 percentage points and 8.6 percentage points in April and May. Down below, we observe pandemic month effects, which corroborate the individual or the beginning figure. So we start to see some effect in March as the pandemic takes hold, significant levels in the entire sample and the essential sector sample. The greatest magnitude takes place in April across the board. Now looking at characteristics of interest, we find that females were more likely to become unemployed throughout these first 3 initial months of the pandemic than their male counterparts. This is corroborated by a lot of the existing literature. Contrary to past recessions that have happened, we find females to be displaced more often. I do want to highlight that the magnitude is greatest within the food and agriculture sector, despite there being fewer females employed in that sector than males. And then for Black non-Hispanic individuals, the greatest magnitude of a significant coefficient is in May within the food and agriculture sector of 9.8 percentage points more likely to become unemployed than white non-Hispanic individuals. For Hispanic individuals, surprisingly, we don't see significant, all right, time's up, sorry about that. Any questions or thoughts?
Is there a danger of, I don't know, spillover effects is the like, some
So the way we've set it up, we have tried to prevent that in that we've created time invariant indicators for these individuals based on their employment status pre-pandemic. So if you were in food and agriculture before the pandemic started, we view you as an individual of that sector if you become unemployed later. Does that make sense? Okay. Anything else? Okay.
Hi, everyone. This paper is entitled High Housing Cost and Health Insurance Coverage Under Affordable Care Act. I team up with my co-authors, Yu and Yuxin, who currently work at World Bank Groups and Scamma Business Group. In this paper, we compared insurance coverage in 2010 to 2013 with 2015 to 2019. To determine how individuals with different level of housing affordability gained housing insurance coverage. To answer this two research questions, like how does the Affordable Care Act impact housing insurance coverage based on the level of housing affordability? And does the ACA reduce the disparity across the income level and housing affordability? ACA passed in 2014, and the Medicaid expansion is the major provision of the Affordable Care Act. And it expand eligibility to the low to mid income individuals to let them have, to let more people have house insurance coverage. We contribute the previous literatures. First, we updated the information on the impact of ACA on rates of coverage using the most recent available data from American Community Survey from 2019, and to examine the disparity related to the measures that have not received any attention in previous studies, such as housing. Housing affordability is one of them. And also, we investigated disparity in health insurance coverage among individuals with different level of housing affordability. We use rent to income ratio to classify individual into based on their housing affordability. We find that among individuals with income up to 400% of federal poverty level, and the impact of Medicaid expansion on Medicaid and insurance rate is statistically significant, larger in expansion states compared to non-expansion states. For example, adjusted uninsured coverage decreased about 3.54 percentage points more, compared to non-expansion states. And adjusted Medicaid coverage increased by 8.08 percentage points more in expansion states compared to non-expansion states. And then we classify our population into two groups, individuals with high rent burden and individuals with regular rent burden. So we use rent to income ratio to represent their rent burden. We found that adjusted uninsured coverage, uninsured rates decreased about 3.4 percentage points more in expansion states than non-expansion states. And also we find the coverage difference for Medicaid and private insurance. The number of household renting, the number of renters increased dramatically since 2006. So the increase from 31.6 to 36.6 based on the Pew Research Center. And also the high rent burden, housing affordability is a major issue, and the people who pay a larger portion on their housing always associated with low income. The lack of housing affordability affects the individuals. So reduce the ability to meet other essential expenses. So different from Jeffrey's your paper, I control the housing cost. I control housing cost. So, but in common is we also believe that there are trade-offs. So if the people who have high housing costs, they face the trade-off. There's between either paying the rent or spending money on fresh food, healthcare services, and other basic needs. So the low-income individuals always associated with high housing affordability issues, and as so low-income earners presumably have restricted house resources and increasing the risk of health issues. Medicaid expansion, so having house insurance is crucial, and Medicaid expansions financially protect the individuals low to mid-income earners from house shock. We used the American Community Survey from 2010 to 2019, and ACS benefit our study in three major ways. First, it consistently provides information on health insurance since 2008. And also it provides the information on social economics, demographic, as well as housing factors like housing quality, housing affordability, and neighborhood information. It contains 3 million respondents each year. And we use the data from 18 to 64 years of age. And high rent burden are the individuals who has above 30% of the rent to income ratio. And our dependent variable is type of coverage. It's a binary variable, can be 1, for example, being uninsured, and 0 otherwise. Comparison in housing insurance are conducted before and after the ACA implementation among individuals with different level of housing affordability and among individuals living in participating states and non-participating states. We use difference, indifference, and triple difference to test the insurance coverage gains. We find that, for example, panel A, we just focus on the individual up to 400% of federal poverty level. And for example, the last column represents the adjusted difference in different results. The people who live in expansion states, their uninsured coverage decreased 3.44 percentage points more compared to non-expansion states. And then for panel B and panel C, we stratified individuals based on their rate to income ratio. Low rent burden issue represent their rent to income ratio is up to 30%. So for example, 7.68 represent the individuals who live in expansion states. The Medicaid insurance coverage gain 7.68 percentage points more compared to non-expansion states. We also have our triple difference results. For example, among income up to above 100 and 400% federal poverty level, and the uninsured, the Medicaid coverage at 0.015 represent the pre-post difference. It's about 1.5 percentage points for individuals, for high rent burden individuals. So that means high rent burden individuals benefit more from the Medicaid expansion after the ACA implementation. The Medicaid expansion provides the eligibility for the income for low to mid income individuals who didn't have access to insurance coverage. And after the Medicaid expansion, they are able to purchase. They're able to go to the health market, to go to the marketplace to get the direct purchase private insurance, or they are, if their income is below 138%, they are eligible for Medicaid. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you so much. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Li Qing Li. I'm assistant professor at Cal State Fullerton, and this is a joint work with my co-author Didi Long from Cal State Long Beach. This paper is about households' preference for impure public use using community garden as an example. Urban agriculture has become a planning priority in many cities in the US, and as an essential form of urban agriculture, community garden provide a space for local residents to grow fruits and vegetables. And urban community garden can provide both the public benefits, which is like the ecosystem services that can be provided similar to other type of urban green spaces, and urban community garden can also provide private benefits such as the produce harvest from the garden. Given that both the private and public benefits provided by the community garden, we can see community garden as an impure public use. City planners these days also see community garden as a tool to address a social equity issues. For instance, a community garden can provide fruits and vegetables to the community that have food insecurity issues, or they can provide urban green spaces to give an unbalanced distribution of the current urban space distribution. However, there's also literature show that the preference for urban agriculture is associated with high income and more educated households. Then the question is, who values community garden? What are people's preference for community garden? So the research question we tend to answer here first is what are individuals' preference for different features of community gardens? And more specifically, do low-income households whom the garden intend to benefit value the community gardens they have? And given that community gardens are considered as impure public use, we want to see if the public co-benefits, which here is the environmental benefits provided by community garden, would encourage individuals' willingness to contribute for having a garden. And in order to answer this question, we conduct a discrete choice experiment in Los Angeles counties in California. So this region has lots of existing gardens, and there's a growing trend for having more community gardens in this region. So for a typical choice experiment, we tell our respondents in the background information saying that in your neighborhood, there's a piece of marginal land that can be converted to community garden under a land revitalization project, and how much you're willing to contribute to having this community garden. And each respondents are facing 6 different choice cards, and this is an example of a typical choice card. So on each choice card, respondents are facing 3 different options. The first 2 are different levels and different types of community gardens and with the level of contribution they need to pay to have the garden. And if they don't want any gardens, they can also choose the last option, which says no community garden. The type of features we include for the choice card includes first, environmental benefits, different level of environmental benefits that can be provided by the garden. Second, the harvest produced, how would they be allocated? Whether people are going to consume themselves or they're going to donate to the food bank. The third one is the size of the garden, which is measured by how many households the garden can serve. And in choice experiment, pecuniary payment vehicle is commonly used like property tax or monthly payment fee. So here we include the monthly payment fee as one of the payment vehicle. We also include another payment vehicle here, which is the time contribution, the weekly volunteering time you need to spend for having this garden. We're having this for two major reasons. First is the special feature of the community gardens. That is, without people's volunteering work, the garden is hard to survive. Second, we include this is because if we only use money as the mode of contribution, then we may underestimate people's preference for environmental goods, especially for low-income households. This is widely studied in developing country setting when they are trying to study people's preference for environmental goods. In those countries, when respondents have limited access to cash, that would underestimate their willingness to pay for the environmental goods. This also applies in the US if we're trying to see the low-income households' preference for environmental goods. So after collected data, we first run a latent class model that is classify respondents into two groups based on the demographic information that is listed here under the class membership. We can see that people basically in class 1 have a strong preference for community garden. They have a gain utility for having a garden. They want to have higher environmental benefits compared to donate to the food bank. They prefer to consume the food themselves, although they also want a larger garden, and they see the time contribution as a cost. But basically people in class 2, which is about 15% of my sample, they don't care much about the garden and they don't see time as a cost of contribution. So we can see what type of people are more likely to be in class 1. From the class membership, we can see that the people are in class 1 are the people who are less likely to be female. They're more likely to be white, Democrat. They actually currently have a community garden in their neighborhood. They're also more likely to have a full-time job. This makes sense because we can see that people in class 2 are the people who are more likely to be retired, so they don't see time contribution as a cost anymore. So I also calculate people's marginal willingness to contribute for different features for community garden for the people in class 1, which is the group who cares about community garden, both through willingness to contribute money, the dollar value, and the willingness to contribute hours, how many hours you're willing to pay. Due to the time limitation, I'm going to skip this. The next thing I want to say is that we have two other questions that I want to answer here. First is that given community gardens are impure public goods, the question is, do the public co-benefits encourage people's contribution for community garden? In order to answer this question, I have a mixed logic model, and I include the two interaction terms here. One is the environmental benefits attribute interact with the time contribution. The other one is the environmental attributes interact with the cost contribution. Given these two terms are insignificant, we say that at least we say that environmental benefits coming from community garden does not encourage the willingness to contribute for community garden. Another question we want to see is that whether there's heterogeneity in terms of preference for community garden among low-income and high-income households. So we also have interaction terms here that indicating whether you're considered the low-income group. Although we can see that low-income households have a lower preference for having a garden in their neighborhood, and they are very price sensitive, which is not a surprise. Also, they want a larger garden compared to the high-income household. But if we see the time contribution interaction with the income group, we see the interaction terms insignificant. So this is our main takeaway here. First is that people do value community gardens. We can see that people want larger environmental benefits. They want a relatively larger garden, and compared to donate the food to the food bank, they want to consume the food themselves. Second is that given it's impure public goods, actually the public co-benefits part from the environmental benefits may not affect people's willingness to contribute, both in terms of time and money for having a community garden. Third one is people in low-income communities actually prefer larger gardens, even though they are price sensitive, but they have a similar preference towards the time contribution for having a garden as their high-income counterpart. So that's all. Thank you. Any suggestions or questions?
Okay, seems that we have a small group here. So the pros and cons, pros is that we don't have that huge time pressure, right? I thought I would get the timer for 7 minutes, but a little bit of pressure off now. So today I'm going to present a paper called Do US Consumers Value Genetically Modified Farmed Salmon? My name is Angie Zheng at Maine Business School at University of Maine. My co-authors are Rudy Nager at Texas A&M, Wei Yang at Arkansas, and Kanata Kunega at Gulf of Maine Research Institute. Okay, so aquaculture is the fast growing food production sector in the world. The US creates a significant demand for seafood, but the United States ranks only number 17th in total aquaculture production in the world. So we are left behind. Although the US supplies about 1/3 of world wild salmon, the US salmon consumption has been supplied by rising imports of farmed salmon. About 2/3 of US salmon consumption is imported, and about 2/3 is farmed. So there's always debate about the pros and cons of wild-caught versus farmed salmon. Wild-caught salmon is captured in the fish's natural habitat. People typically consider wild salmon as more natural, cleaner, and of higher quality. But there are concerns of about depletion of wild stock. Farmed salmon, the bleeding, the feed are under controlled environment, but there are still concerns about the risk of contaminations and also exposure to antibiotics and other harmful substances. In addition to the debate about the pros and cons of farmed salmon versus wild-caught salmon, the genetically modified salmon actually made it to a new addition to the seafood world and added to this debate. Approved by FDA in 2015 to be produced at foreign facilities and in 2018 at US domestic facilities, the genetically modified salmon is the first GM animal to be approved for human consumption. So talking about GM salmon versus the conventionally farmed salmon, the GM salmon grows more rapidly than the non-GM farmed salmon, and it uses less feed, correspondingly less cost of the feed. Similar as the non-animal GM food, the GM salmon also has a controversial nature. So the advocate groups, their opinion is that GM salmon will take the pressure off wild fish stocks, and it will help provide protein sources to a growing population. But from the other end, the conservation groups, they think that they are concerned about the impact of GM salmon on the ecosystems. So definitely there is a need to gain a better understanding of consumers' preferences and the valuation for GM salmon. There are some previous studies on consumers' willingness to pay for GM salmon. Specifically, they use alternative price scenarios to directly elicit people's willingness to pay, or they use contingent valuation method with 2 yes and no questions. And also, the multiple price list method was used. But no other, to our best knowledge, no other study has examined consumers' valuation for GM salmon in comparison to the conventionally farmed salmon and the wild-caught salmon, which is a real choice scenario facing consumers when they purchase salmon. So in this paper, our goal is to provide a comprehensive understanding of U.S. consumers' valuation for GM salmon, how it adds to their choices between the non-GM salmon or conventionally farmed salmon and wild-caught salmon, and what factors affect their valuation for GM salmon. We designed a survey with choice experiment using Bayesian efficiency design, created 12 choice sets split into 2 blocks, 6 choice sets for each participant. And in each choice set, we have 2 1-pound salmon fillet alternatives plus a no buy option. So attitudes, 3 attitudes, production method include conventionally farmed salmon, GM farmed salmon, and wild-caught salmon. Product form, fresh versus frozen, because here we are talking about salmon production. Product form is another important attribute, and most of the time it interact with production method. Price levels, 6 levels, which covers observation from online salmon and also in-store salmon on sale. And in this survey, we also included questions about consumers' perceptions of safety, environmental sustainability, and the welfare of wild-caught salmon and wild-caught fish and farmed fish, and also knowledge of GM food products and attitudes towards GM food products and technology. So basically, perceptions, knowledge, and attitudes. These 3 perspectives, we included that because later we wanted to use those variables as threshold to do subgroup analysis. Okay, so this is our main model, estimated willing to pay premiums using willingness to pay space model. So for frozen salmon fillet, consumers willing to pay $5.84 less for conventionally farmed salmon and $67 less for GM farmed salmon compared to wild-caught salmon. For fresh salmon fillet, consumers willing to pay for $7.95 less for conventional farmed salmon and $20 less for GM farmed salmon compared to wild-caught salmon. So these results actually indicate that U.S. consumers oppose GM farmed salmon. And also talking about product form in relation to production method, consumers, sorry, that's actually my 7 minutes. Consumers care more about difference between wild-caught and farmed salmon if salmon fillet is fresh. So that's the main model. Given I already used the 7 minutes, I have 2 minutes, right? So I think I'm going to very quickly go over the subgroup analysis. Like I mentioned, we did 3 subgroup analysis. First group, we use perceptions. First perception is concerns about health and safety. So the quick result is that if consumers are more concerned about health and safety issues for wild-caught fish and perceive farmed fish as healthier and safer, they are more likely to accept GM farmed salmon. And if they are more concerned about environmental and sustainability issues for wild-caught fish, they have a higher acceptance for farmed salmon, either non-GM or GM farmed salmon. And consumers who are more concerned about welfare issues for wild-caught fish have a higher acceptance level and valuation for GM farmed salmon. Okay, so second subgroup analysis, using knowledge as a variable to divide the groups. Consumers reported a higher level subjective knowledge of GM in food production are willing to pay a much lower amount for GM farmed salmon. So the more they think they know, the less they are willing to pay for GM salmon. And the third subgroup analysis using attitude as a variable to divide the groups. So consumers having a negative GM attitude are willing to pay less for GM farmed salmon than their counterparts who have a positive attitude. So very quick conclusion, consumers' willingness to pay for wild-caught salmon that ranked the highest, followed by conventionally farmed salmon, followed by GM farmed salmon. So GM ranked the lowest in terms of willingness to pay. And heterogeneity exists in the valuation of consumers across levels of consumers' perceptions, knowledge, and attitudes based on subgroup analysis. And also interesting finding is that the difference in consumers' valuation between wild-caught and farmed salmon is larger for fresh salmon than for frozen salmon. So when people consume frozen salmon product, they don't care the difference between wild and farmed that much comparing to fresh product. And also, based on the results, we draw some policy implications into the GM salmon labeling and the sustainability certifications. So more details we put into the paper. Okay, thank you so much. I don't know whether I still have time for questions. Okay, questions. Go ahead, please.
I guess a two-part question is genetically modified salmon, is that already like, and if so, what kind of traits are they putting into it, like compared to conventionally farmed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I didn't put that language. I should have copy paste because this is like food science knowledge. So basically they use, like the wild caught salmon, there's called Chinook salmon, which is also king salmon. They use some part of the gene from Chinook salmon, and then they use something called promoter from another fish called ocean pout. So kind of use the ocean pout promoter to trigger that gene. So, I mean, I'm sorry, I think I'm not accurate for this part, but the end result is that they grow faster and they use less feed. So it takes less time to make them to the size that they can be on the market.
That's really interesting.
Yes.
Just a quick technical comment. If I am correct, in the tables, some standard deviation is a negative sign.
Did I have that?
Looks some, if I'm correct.
Oh, yes.
So be careful of that. Could it be negative?
Yeah, it should.
Usually, don't worry.
Yes. So.
I don't know which software the idea, but for example, straight up. Sometimes be negative value, but you just need to.
Let me double check because these are not negative. There's no way they are negative, but why did I copy it wrong? Let me double check because this is time like I didn't copy paste the picture, but sorry, because is it? Yeah, this is embarrassing because I just reviewed another paper. I mentioned this. I said like something wrong, but I made the same mistake. So
Some software like state, but they give the negative value.
I'm thinking maybe copy paste. Yes, thank you for catching that. The numbers are no problem. So because we already got the paper, but let me double check that. Let me think. I mean, like to be honest, Michael also rerun this model, but my impression is the same. Like standard deviation shouldn't be shouldn't. She's saying like could be, right? Or could be negative.
It's like, because that's my understanding, why one is larger model, like say that how people say that the standardization, the sign of the standardization doesn't matter for interpretation, just interpret as possible.
Yeah, let me check with Ray about that. But my impression is the same with you. It should be square root, right?
That's right.
Just leave it the negative. Just keep that full project.
So you guys have, sorry, I think I'm taking up someone else time. I will, yeah, but I will follow up with you, I guess.
It's for a reviewer and the journal.
So like, let's correct. So you said like it could be negative and then just interpret it as positive, right?
Yeah.
Let me check with Wib because this is really needs to pay, but when I run it by myself, actually I didn't have negative. But this is like we run it using R. So let me check with him, and if I find a better answer, I will make sure I. Yeah, this.
Okay, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Daniele. I am associate professor at the University of Reading from UK. Today I'm presenting a study which was done by PhD student Agnese Rondoni and also other co-author Vincenzina Caputo, Elena Milan, and Professor Naiga. So what I'm going to talk today, it's about eggs. And we all know that basically the eggs industry is one of the most important industry in the animal sector. And especially the chicken egg are one of the most important type of staple food and very important source of protein most of the time at very low cost. However, there are a lot of issues that affect the egg industry nowadays. For example, we have a rapid demand increase of proteins, animal proteins, especially from Asian countries. Also, there is an increasing number of health issues and nutritional issues linked to the consumption of eggs. For example, the problem related to the allergies or the problem related to the cholesterol that usually this kind of eggs product produce. Also, there are consumers concerned about animal welfare. For example, one of the most, the category of eggs sold, for example, in the UK are free-range eggs. I don't know in the US, but so people are becoming more and more concerned about the animal welfare in general and especially also for the eggs. Also, there is an important aspect about the environmental impact of this sector. So the rising number of people which are vegans and vegetarians who don't want to consume or limit to consume consumption of eggs is very important. So one of the issues that basically the egg industry is facing is, okay, we need to try to think about egg alternatives. Can we escape from the chicken eggs or not? So the last few years, there's been an increasing number of alternatives to eggs, and is expected the egg market growing a lot of these products. So one of the possible alternatives are the so-called plant-based eggs, which imply that you can produce eggs without using animals. Like cultured meat can be produced without killing any animals. Plant-based eggs are substitutes called alternative replacement. There are many names now that can be produced. So basically there are two types of process. One is a process that extract basically proteins from legumes like soybeans, some peas, or any other things, also from pumpkin seeds and so on. A second type of process is using fermentation or isolation process. So this is a kind of new food technology, new food product that can be produced. And there are different types of plant-based eggs. Some are already on the market, some are really developing. So we did previous studies interviewing several startup companies in many countries of the world. And so they are developing different products. Basically, there are three types that these are not exhaustive, but this is what we basically found empirically. The liquid plant-based eggs, which are also available here in this country, they use vegetables like mock beans, pumpkin seeds, which are available here in the US, produced by Just and Spare Food. Another type are so-called egg-shaped plant-based egg. This is the name that we gave, which is a type of product originated by soybeans and peas, which replicate the conventional eggs and actually are not on the market yet, but are produced by an Italian university. The last type is the so-called plant-based eggs in a powder form that use yeast, so a fermentation process produced by Clara Food and food ingredients, but they are still not available on the market. But this is a market which is growing a lot, is growing very fast. So there is a possibility that already some are already, so I'm not updated in the last thing. So why plant-based eggs? What are the advantages? Well, they don't contain allergens and cholesterol, so they don't have the problems that chicken conventional eggs can produce. They don't involve animals. So people who are against, who are very sensitive to animal welfare, I mean, they're happy probably for that. They are lower carbon footprint. Although we have to say that the carbon footprint from chicken product for eggs production is not as big as the conventional meat, but it's still important. There are several drawbacks. The first is consumer acceptance. Do consumers accept this product, which are totally different in terms of production compared to the conventional eggs? So our main aim was to investigate consumer demand and willingness to pay for plant-based eggs and identify which could be the best communication channel to communicate with consumers. I have to say that there is basically in the literature, there is nothing about consumer acceptance for this kind of product. Apart our studies up to now, we did several qualitative studies before doing that. We did that because there was nothing available. So we did a label choice experiment using Qualtrics with more than 800 consumers. We collected last year, and we choose the type of egg-shaped plant-based eggs made with soybean or peas that I presented before, because these are the type of eggs it's more similar to the chicken and conventional eggs. These were the attributes and levels, so it says two attributes, the type of product and the price. You can see now 5 levels of potential products. So we compare the first 3, which are the free-range eggs, barn eggs, and cage eggs, which are the most important type of conventional eggs in the UK market. And then we introduced 2 new products, which are not there, which are plant-based egg produced with soybean and plant-based egg produced with peas. And then we have the 4 different price level. Then we have several treatments. So we provide the same definition of plant-based eggs for all the treatments. We're using a between subject design, and we have the treatment 1, we haven't provided any information, so just basic information, scientific information, what plant-based eggs are, okay? Then on the other two treatments, we inform consumers before doing the choice sets. First was the company website with communication, then the social media, and then the label communication to see what's the more effective, what's the channel more effective to communicate with consumers. We did a econometric analysis using the random parameter logic model, and we made several calculations. Share of responded with positive and negative value for each product, conditional and unconditional market share, and average consumer willingness to pay using the software. What we found, so it's very tiny, this table I tried to copy. So basically what we found that the results show that the most valuable evaluated type of eggs are the free range eggs, okay, which is natural because it's the type of eggs more sold in the UK, followed by barn eggs and cage eggs. In the control treatment, we see that the valuation for both plant-based eggs are quite low, okay? So that's something which is important. But if you see the three treatments, there are some interesting differences. For example, we see that for the plant-based eggs with peas, when we inform consumer through social media or through labels, they have much more effect than website or the control. While for the soy, that's quite low. Okay, so it looks like that the communication channel can work. If we show the conditional, unconditional market share, we can see similar results. That when we inform consumers about what plant-based eggs are, the benefits of them, so that both for soybean and the peas type of plant-based egg, they usually increase. Okay, so there is a positive effect of these things. The same, similar for the conditional one. So it's conditional to buy a product. And finally, this is some of the results. This is still ongoing calculation. We haven't finished yet some preliminary results. So what we can see that the free range eggs are the most important. But when we communicate, okay, with the consumers the benefit of plant-based eggs, especially using the plant-based egg with peas for social media or through labels, that can increase quite a lot. Not sufficiently to replace both the barn and the free range eggs, but sufficiently probably to have more interest compared to the cage eggs. So some discussion, the conclusion. So again, free range eggs is the most type of sold products, favored by barn eggs and plant-based egg with peas, cage eggs, and plant-based egg with soy. The control and the website information is not much more effective, okay, we can see, but the social media and the labels could be much more effective. So we encourage producers try to use these channels compared to a website system. And there is also a possibility, we have seen that the plant-based egg made with peas are preferred over the soy because we know there is a lot of, especially in Europe, people believe that soy is not, the production of soy, it's not so environmental friendly. Probably, this is an explanation, probably an explanation of that findings. So that's all for me. Don't know if you have any question. Yes, please.
Thank you. So I was just more curious on, so when you are screening these respondents, did you require them to was it part of the requirement for them to not have taste plant-based eggs before?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Thanks for it. No, this was not a requirement. I mean, it's important because, you know, when you taste the product, preference can change a lot. So my people can be scared about plant-based eggs because they probably don't taste well, right? However, we have to say that in the UK, these products are not yet available. So it's really unlikely that any person has tried this product before. I mean.
Yeah, and the reason I was asking this briefly was that
yeah.
because, you know, it seems like the social media has a different effect for and the 1 week soy. So maybe if I were a consumer that had tasted the 1 week cookies, then, I thought it was tastes pretty good, then I give a positive.
Yeah,
on that.
that could be. I mean, we haven't asked, but that is a good point. I mean, because, well, then one of the next step to do is try to combine, this is an hypothetical study, to combine with some tasting. When we have the product, because these products are not approved in the UK. So when they are approved by the government, so with labeling and so on, if you can taste the product, probably if the taste is good, because we know that the taste would be good, if not people that like it, that don't buy it. So probably with that, the study would be more value compared to what they have. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dai Kim from Michigan State University. My research studies consumer preferences and demand for plant-based seafood alternatives, and we focus on whether processed nature of the plant-based seafood alternatives matter for consumer food choices. Before we dive in, I will introduce a little bit about what plant-based seafood alternatives are and why they exist, and then explain experimental design, and I'll conclude with results and implications. So what are the plant-based seafood alternatives? They're plant-based seafood, so they don't have fish products inside, and they resemble taste and texture of conventional seafood products. They also contain nutrients such as omega-3 fatty acids, but they do not contain harmful contaminants like microplastics or mercury. But they're highly processed products. And looking at the market is still very small, even compared to plant-based meat market. But it's growing, and they made 42% growth in past 2 years. And the industry raised $175 million in investment last year. So you might wonder why they even exist, and they exist to partly trying to solve environmental and health issues coming from conventional seafood production. But their potential to partially address these issues depends on consumer acceptance. Since the market is at its nascent stage, there is a lack of market data and consumer studies. So we conduct consumer studies on plant-based seafood alternatives, and our main objective is to understand consumer preferences and demand for plant-based seafood alternatives relative to conventional seafood, as well as other potential substitutes. So we focus with the processing stage matter. So we conducted a between subject design. So respondents were assigned into one of the fresh product study or processed product study. We also gave respondents an option to see the list of ingredients. So if they answered yes, they were given the information about the ingredients of the product in our study. Otherwise, they were processed to the choice questions. This is an example of the list of ingredients for fresh product study. We can clearly see that the plant-based products have long list of ingredients. And this is an example of choice question. We had 3 conventional seafood, which is salmon, tuna, and shrimp. And we also have their plant-based counterpart, as well as beef steak, chicken breast, and tofu. We also have no buy option. Looking at the result, so our respondents were protein consumer who consume proteins from at least one of meat, seafood, or plants in the past 3 months at the time of the survey. And we can see that like majority of respondents were not familiar at all with plant-based seafood alternatives. Using the estimates from mixed logic, we simulated market shares with different price scenarios. For simplicity, we fixed the price of conventional products at its mean price, and we only vary the prices of plant-based seafood products. So we, the 200% price premium would represent the near future market, and we can see that the plant-based products have really small market share. It ranges from 0.02% to 0.12%. As the price declines to price parity case, we can see a large growth in shares for plant-based salmon and plant-based shrimp. But plant-based tuna has still small market share. So what does this tell us? This tells us that the changes in market share depends on species. We also observed that the preference or ordering of conventional seafood products transferred into ordering of plant-based seafood products. We find similar results for processed products as well. So as the price premium declines, the market shares increase, but the increments depends on products. We see a sizable increase, especially for plant-based breaded shrimp and plant-based canned tuna, but not so much for plant-based smoked salmon. We also looked at determinants of willingness to pay estimates. We find that consumers are very heterogeneous, and also that factors affecting willingness to pay estimates differ significantly across the product types. We also find that purchasing behavior matters, but the awareness of issues from fisheries and aquaculture does not have significant effects on the willingness to pay estimates. So to summarize, price-induced change in the market shares of plant-based seafood alternatives depends on the product type and species, but lowering price requires technological development and large-scale investment, and also stable supply of raw ingredients, production scale-up, etc. So the industry might need government support on this. And as we find that consumers are very heterogeneous, we recommend to develop more targeted marketing strategies and policy interventions. And also the purchasing format of seafood matters. So placing in the retail store, placing plant-based seafood alternatives in the prepackaged or processed seafood section would increase the sales rather than placing them in butcher counter. That's all I have. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please. Yeah. This one? No, it wasn't basket-based. It was just like this. We had a choice question per respondent.
So is this one choice question?
Yeah, it's just one of example.
One.
Yeah.
Yeah, but different price combination. Sorry? So it's a labeled choice experiment. So we only change the price. I think you're talking about the unlabeled choice experiment.
So this is the label.
Yeah. Yeah, we only change the one attribute.
So we don't have the plant-based view.
So my research focused on seafood. We only include those non-seafood products just to avoid the choice going to no buy option too much. This is following the paper written by Ross Cantonso 2016. They also had some other products just to avoid the choice going to no buy options. Do you have any other questions? Okay, if there is no question, I'll just end the presentation. Thank you.